So welcome to another edition of Upbuild Conversations. And today I have the pleasure of talking with Hari Prasada about his recent reflection and blog posts for the Upbuild newsletter. And so Hari, it's a pleasure to be here with you today.
I'm excited, Michael. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So your piece is titled Elon Musk, an ancient Indian text suggests we're living in a matrix. And you begin with two very thought-provoking questions. And so for the benefit of the listeners, I'll just read them here. So they are, what if we all live in a massive video game? What if there's no reality to our world as we know it, beyond someone else's concoction, where we play temporary roles with wins and losses? And so it would be great if you could get us started by bringing us into your inspiration for these questions and why they're important to you.
Oh, that's a good question. Well, it starts with my own spiritual journey, and always, I guess, maybe even rewinding before that. Um, I would say growing up, I could sense that there's something a little bit off with the way the world functions. That I have a vision for how things should be, and I believe many people have this. I would say most people. I think to me it was an extreme precision around how things should be and a frequency of all the time. Um, and I noticed that it just never went that way. And even if logically things should have gone that way, or morally things should have gone that way, it was completely unpredictable. And I was feeling like, you know what? There must be a reason why I'm so wired to envision exactly how things should be. Um, and I was very, very struck by certain words growing up, like enlightenment, in being enlightened. Even the term self-realization really hit me. I didn't know what those meant, but I had some sense that then things would make sense. Then you would understand what is a reality beyond what we're perceiving presently, and the way things are not quite right ever. It's never quite right, never quite right, never quite right. Even when we say, oh, it's perfect because we lowered our expectations of how we really wanted things to be. And we have this term of acceptance. Yes, I accept. But there's kind of a concession to that. There's a way in which uh, it becomes like I'm almost being merciful that I've lowered my expectations and conceded that this is perfect enough. And that aren't I good for being so accepting and grateful for what I have? And there's a strong place for that. That's also a spiritual principle. But it it shows that there are cracks to how we really are craving at our core for things to be. And when I embarked on my spiritual journey, it became clear that there were reasons beyond anything I'd considered for this willing perfection and experience of imperfection at all times. Um, and I had learned about this concept of Maya, which comes up in the piece, and which is a strong underpinning of the Vedic spiritual texts, which I've studied and taught. Um, and Maya simply means illusion. It means a world that is not our reality, which is very much what the Matrix is pointing to, and what Elon Musk is alluding to in his own way. That there is a world that engulfs us, which is not the reality we are actually meant for. That there is something very different going on that is imperceptible to us. And we're kind of caught in this dream world, if you will. And it was actually in a conversation with a coaching client, and I mentioned this in the piece, that he made the connection to Elon Musk when I was telling him about the Bhagavad Gita's philosophy and the Vedic conception of this simulation, this dream world, and talked about the Matrix. And he said, "Oh, well, should check out what Elon Musk has to say about this." And I did, and I was completely fascinated. So that prompted my writing this.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And so, for us mortals here on Earth, as we're contemplating possibly being in uh, a dream world like this, what are some of the lessons that we should be thinking about?
Yeah, there are a number of lessons. I think certainly one that comes to mind is there is more to life than meets the eye. What we perceive with our present senses, which we have so much faith in, we should be much more wary of than we are. The sort of empirical worldview that we are uh, trained to embrace has its merits and it has some strong limiters. And the thing is, when we don't know that we don't know things, um, those blind spots really they kind of hijack our potential. And with the love for what we can perceive and the trust in what we can perceive, we miss out on so much. And we don't then invest in what's beyond. And we come up with ideologies that basically say, well, I don't believe that anyone can know. Even if there is a reality beyond this, I don't believe it's possible. If we can't perceive it, then I don't think that we can know it. So what's the point in wasting our time talking about it, thinking about it, trying to invest in it? And I would say that there are people who have invested in uncovering this reality. I often speak about Plato's cave. We're a little bit in Plato's cave. That we think that there's no light outside the cave. There's no existence beyond what we know and what we can perceive. But the person who says, I think there must be a light outside, there must be a world outside of this cave. That person is ridiculed. That person is an outsider, doesn't fit in with the world. Um, but that person with courage ventures out and then can tell others, wait a minute, hey, there's actually something here. And those people may say, oh, you're crazy. Give me a break, prove it. Well, you have to actually come out of the cave to see with your own eyes. Um, and I'm also reminded of, we screen a clip of Carl Sagan in the Call to Awaken, our Bhagavad Gita course, where he talks about the different dimensions that we can experience versus the ones that we know are there, but we are limited to perceive. And then there are dimensions which we don't even know are there. So that we live in a world of three dimensionality, and the fourth dimension of time we know is there, but we can't quite grasp it. Yeah, what's to say that there are not dimensions beyond even time, and which great sages of all different traditions, not only the Vedic tradition, have experienced that, as Jesus said, build your treasures not in this world but in the next. There's a way in which there have been so many enlightened beings who have come from all different paths and shared their understanding of reality that matches up beautifully. And that's what actually really encouraged me in the beginning of my spiritual adventure, that I saw, oh my God, this is lining up. It's like a puzzle. All these different wisdom paths are saying something that lines up so incredibly. What are the odds? And you see the philosophical, intellectual rigor and the realization um, that is behind the weight that is behind and the transformative impact of learning from these great souls is incredible. So the coming back to the lesson, let us not trust so much in our limited capabilities. I mean, we can't see without a microscope, and even we don't have microscopes that are infinitely powerful. We dogs can hear things that we can't hear, and yet it's like, well, if I didn't hear it, it's not so relevant to me. How do we know that? How do we know?
What you say resonates really deeply, especially around Plato's cave and kind of trying to take a peek out and then having the experience of friends and family members, even, maybe not completely supporting that peeking out. And I think that would be okay. But the problem that I've experienced in my own life is that also creates a story in my head. Well, maybe I shouldn't be out here. Even I shouldn't even be kind of taking a look for these things because, 99% of my day, I'm not perceiving them with my own senses. And so it's gone from just other people being less than supportive or me using that as an excuse to kind of shut it down myself. And I think that's where, in periods of my life where I haven't been as spiritually attuned and sort of spiritually motivated to actually discover truth, it's been myself that's held me back more than anybody else.
I really appreciate that. How do you approach that predicament?
I think it's about making time to say that this is important and then actually dedicating time to drop into stillness and connect with the inner parts of myself. And what you mentioned in the piece about we want to know who we are, but before we do that, it's also helpful to know who we're not. And so doing the work of sharing who I'm not has also been helpful along the way.
Fantastic. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, no, I relate very much. I mean, for me also, I'm coming from a secular humanist scientific worldview that is so deeply ingrained in me, something which I have pinned my identity on unconsciously. In other words, I didn't intend to pin my identity on that, didn't know that I was doing that. It just happened. It's just the way I grew up, the way that I found my way through the world, the way things resonated with me at the time. And and I see value in some of it, but I see where when you're pinning an identity, that's extremely dangerous in the first place because that identity then makes you unable to go beyond it, to see outside. And this is really challenging. I mean, this is the confirmation bias, and we see. I mean, there's abundant evidence that even whether you're a liberal or a conservative politically, you have the same likelihood of dismissing truth that doesn't match your paradigm. In other words, it's been studied that when when a conservative is presented with facts, incontrovertible truths that don't line up with the conservative paradigm, they are dismissed. I don't believe it. And the same is true from the liberal. And so that is really dangerous. And it's because we have put ourselves in a camp where this is what it's supposed to be. This is how I fit in. This is what I'm comfortable with. This is what's valued and what seems like it's really smart and correct. And I don't actually really concern myself with the truth. And so, even with a spiritual worldview, we have to always be so careful that that doesn't become an identity, and that doesn't lead us away from wanting to know what is the truth. There's a wonderful uh, guru of mine. I've multiple gurus. There's someone who I've studied under formally, and then there are others who have been amazing guides for me as well. And this particular one, uh, he he shares that, you know, the philosophy from the Vedic culture has been so powerful. It's been so extraordinary, mind expanding, and experiential that he has not come across something that has been able to shake his conviction in that truth that he has experienced. And if something were to come, he would be very open to that. Why not? Right? We don't have to be threatened. At the same time, you know, his guru and also my guru's guru, both studied under Srila Prabhupada, who translated the Bhagavad Gita that is most popular, that is the number one best-selling Bhagavad Gita of all time. Srila Prabhupada would say, you know, people ask me, how are you so confident? Why are you so confident? And almost like wanting to point out some arrogance. And spiritual values do not support arrogance. So it's almost like, you know, people are trying to confront him on an inconsistency. How are you so confident? It can almost be perceived as arrogance. And Prabhupada would say, I don't want to be uh, anything but honest. How can I deny what I've experienced? You want me to pretend that I have not experienced what I have? That is impossible. I'm only speaking from exactly what I have seen and known to be true myself.
I feel like you're calling me and a lot of other people out with this story here because, I mean, when at least for me, when I've experienced my sort of highest show of confidence, that often is arrogance, and I also have thought with spiritual teachers, given my own lack of confidence in that specific arena, is like how can they be so confident? And I do want to kind of poke holes in that because that would almost confirm my worldview, which is not having confidence in the spiritual worldview.
Yeah, I mean, I've been there exactly, and I'm sure you've heard me speak about this, that when I first met Radhanath Swami, who is the person who introduced me to my spiritual path, and he's also the best-selling author of a book called The Journey Within, as well as the author of his autobiography, The Journey Home. He, you know, he seemed a bit too good to be true. Like it just, I couldn't imagine that somebody could be so saintly and be for real. It's like, come on, there's got to be something that I'm not seeing here. And how is he so convinced of what he's saying? Like, you know, he's giving these rousing talks to inspire us to move towards enlightenment, to become our best selves based on an understanding of the real self, the soul. And I'm thinking, like, how does he know? Come on, this doesn't make sense. And I was really also, as you said, confronted by it. It was super uncomfortable. And when I had introduced others to him, they were also inspired by him, just as I was, but they didn't want to know more. It was like, you know what? This was a good experience. I'm going to leave it at that.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, I mean, you can imagine there are people that might be so confronted that it's not even a good experience for them. But these were open-minded, bright kids at the time that I had introduced to him, and they were inspired. But they were like, "That's good, you know, good for him." And that's how I wanted to be, and I couldn't, because there was something that was gnawing at me, eating away at me, that is that really sincere? How do I know that I know all there is to be known? How do I know that I can't uncover what he has uncovered? How do I know that it's not real, that it is too good to be true? I don't have enough conviction in that. That's wishful thinking so that I can go back to normal, so that I can go back to my comfortable way of being, which I've worked out for myself over however many years, decades, and, is good enough for me. And anything that would, kind of shake that paradigm, that's threatening. And it was threatening. And so I was hoping, just as we've been talking about, to prove him wrong, to find out that he's not who he looks like. And unfortunately, I was not able to do that. So here we are. I found that he was incredible beyond my wildest conception. I mean, just a pure-hearted, extremely loving, and extremely wise soul. I mean, it's an understatement.
Beautiful. And so you just talked about, kind of being in that comfortable life, not seeing reality. And I think, and this is also in the title of your piece, but I think for many of us who have grown up over the last 20 years, the, piece of pop culture which has really exemplified this point is the Matrix. And so in the piece you talk about a concept called uh, residual self-image, which comes from Morpheus, the character Morpheus in the Matrix. And so maybe you could give us a little bit of insight into what that means.
Yeah, it's a great concept in the film. It's really brilliant. So, residual self image, the way Morpheus defines it, is a mental projection of your digital self. And what it means is the way that you see yourself is how you show up. So, in the film, Neo, the protagonist, goes into the Matrix, and he shows up a certain way, physically even, um, though the reality is he looks different. So he actually is unplugged. He's taken out of the dream world. He's unplugged from the Matrix, and he finds that he's bald and has a different dress, much more gritty. And then he shows up in this simulation, um, where it's akin to the Matrix. They're not actually in the Matrix. They're in like what they call the simulation. But the Matrix is also a different kind of simulation. It's the grand simulation. And when he shows up, suddenly, he's like, oh my God, I have hair and I'm dressed differently. What's going on? And Morpheus explains to him at that point that you will look the way you think of yourself, what is natural for you, even though in reality, when you're out of the simulation, you actually look different. So the application philosophically to our lives is that we love to think of ourselves in a certain way. That's what the ego is. That's how we define the ego at Upbuild, is an identity of who I think I should be, an identity of who I think I should be. That is a mental projection. And then I start to dress a certain way. I start to have a certain haircut. I have a way of carrying myself. Everything comes from that. I have a certain way of speaking. It's all based on this idea of who I think I should be. And that is like the residual self-image. So the question is that the real me? And the Matrix, the Bhagavad Gita, and perhaps even Elon Musk would say emphatically no. There is much more to who you are than that. And actually, that is what's covering it. That's what's preventing you from being able to see that you're something more than this.
And so how do we tell when we're starting to embark on this journey of uncovering what's underneath? How do we tell what is real and what's not? Because it can't all be not real.
Yeah, that's a helpful thing to think about. Um, I think there are degrees of reality. There's getting closer and closer to reality. So we don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. You know, I mentioned in the piece, peeling layers of the onion is a process that we should really strongly intend for ourselves. That we peel the layers of the onion of the ego, the identity that is false, that is not actually us, but which covers us. And so at that point, when we're peeling the layers, we're not saying, oh man, but we haven't gotten to the core. So this is all like false. This is, throw it out. This is nonsense. But eventually we will throw it out. Eventually we'll peel another layer. But it's a celebration that one layer removed, one layer closer to who we are. So it's true that we are not living in the ultimate reality. We're living in the ego world.
Mm-hmm.
We're living in the matrix, which is the ego world. But when we get closer to who we are, that is more real. So I talk a lot about not trying to prove in the reflection, not trying to prove. This is a great way to catch your ego in the act. This is a phenomenal anchoring of this peeling of the layers. When you see yourself trying to prove, you know that's the ego. Wait a minute. Let's look at this. Let's see what's beneath it. Let's see, can we reorient in a way? First of all, figuring out why do I feel that I need to prove and owning that. And then seeing, is there another way of being which is more authentic to who I am than just this ego urge to prove?
One of the most tricky things as it relates to this is when I'm trying to prove something that I also know is a core value of mine and something that I know is truthful and is real, something like, generosity or service of others. I know that those are very much a part of my soul and the core part of me, and yet kind of the external manifestation of it most of the time is in service of some identity that I'm holding on to that relates to it, but it's not exactly it.
That's very well said. Yeah. Yeah. I'm with you on that.
And it creates suffering because it's not exactly it. That's kind of the problem. It's very close, and it will look like it, and I'll even have probably tricked a lot of people in my life to thinking that it's really it, and then get that kind of positive feedback that it's it, and so the kind of cycle perpetuates itself. But it's not quite it, and there's a difference in quality
Mhm.
to my being and my actions and the actual service that's being done in that situation versus when it's real.
Yeah. And I think maybe a, a, a good action to keep in mind for that reality that we are acting in a way that is closer to the nature of the real self, that we are acting on certain qualities of the soul, but it's still refracted through the ego. It's still not yet an experience of who I really am. It's refreshing for myself and for others because it's so much closer, which is powerful and necessary, but we've not arrived. I think a good action to sort of cope with that stage of the journey, which is a long, long stage. I mean, that goes on until we keep peeling the layers till there's no more left to peel, right? Um, and how many people do we know who have no more layers left to peel? most of us have never met anybody like that. In fact, I would say hardly anybody has ever met somebody like that. But when you do, my God, does it stay with you? I mean, at least if you're receptive, like, we're not threatened by it, as we were talking about. We're not so confronted that we don't think it's real or relevant to my life. But when you meet somebody like that, it gives incredible, incredible confidence in the path and in the potential that I have for myself. So, in the interim, before we get there, certainly we need that confidence. We also need to not build an identity around getting closer, around finding good qualities in myself that maybe were more covered or I hadn't invested in as much. That becomes it's said like, there are certain last snares of Maya or last um, bonds of illusion, uh, the ego's illusion. And, one of those that's very prominent is I'm a good person, a kind of moral um, contentment, which becomes its own pride, its own egotism of, I am so good. I am
Mhm.
such a good person. In fact, I don't even have much left to go on my journey because I'm so good. Rather than actually being that close, what happens is we become even further distanced by thinking that we're closer than we are and becoming complacent and building an ego on the idea of, look at how good I am, look at how moral, look at how ethical, look at, I give to causes, I'm a humanitarian, I go out and serve people, or even I'm a spiritualist. I mean, that can also happen. Look, I'm such a committed, sincere spiritual practitioner. I have so much insight to offer, and I really try to give to everybody. So pat me on the back, aren't I great? That you see the ego coming in there. So if we can, again, the step is don't build an identity around it. Celebrate the small victories. Celebrate the fact that you did something good for somebody. Don't say, therefore, now I am something. As soon as you make it an I am, it's a problem. When you say, I did something that was good, that's wonderful. That's great. We should always honor what we're able to do in service and always honor the qualities of the soul that are coming to light. But when we then say, therefore, I've embodied the soul, or I'm great now, it doesn't work. That's the ego.
I love that. And I've used that in context of, and I think, this is kind of catching on in self-help circles these days, using it in the context of emotions where you can kind of, rather than saying I am angry, you can say to yourself, oh, I'm experiencing anger, but I don't necessarily need to be fully identified with it. It's just something that is coming and will pass. And you bring this up in the ego context around other identities outside of emotions, which is also so helpful here.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
So this will be a little bit of a transition. I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit about Brave New World. That was a book that was highly impactful on me. I think I read it during my college years, and so the fact that you brought it up in this piece was very personally meaningful. So how does Brave New World's plot and storyline relate to what we're talking about here today?
Oh man, I'm so happy to talk about this with you. This is great. Yeah. Brave New World is ingenious. I read it at a time where I couldn't appreciate it to the fullest extent. And I think I was working and I was living at the monastery. I was a monk for 5 years and I was living at this monastery doing monastic training. I believe that's when I had read it. And I was just starting to get acquainted much more with the spiritual path. It may have even been a little bit before then, but it was very fresh for me. And I was seeing something, but it wasn't fully clicking, and I was comparing it to 1984, which is another great book. And I was thinking, oh, I'm more of an Orwell fan. Like his writing is just, I love it. Huxley, not exactly my style. But what I found later on was, and we actually did a book club around this when I was a monk. I was so impassioned about it. It was awesome. The the thing that comes to light is of 1984 and Brave New World, between the two, both are kind of post-apocalyptic visions of what reality would come to be, or what reality would come to be, what our world would come to be as we know it. And I found that 1984 was this authoritarian takeover, and it was pretty straightforward. And it's possible that some person, or some group could make a hostile takeover and enslave everybody. Um, what is much more compelling to me about Brave New World is there's no hostile takeover. There's no one person, or it's like it's this complicit self-enslavement. It's this way of signing up to be an automaton. I mean, it's a really mind-blowing thing if you think about it. And the real genius is that if you want to imprison somebody effectively, there's no better way than getting them to do it for themselves and feel like this is great. And what Brave New World presents is a reality that is so shockingly close to the present day. I read it and I felt, you know what? Huxley he nailed it. Like he predicted it. Even though it feels more extreme, it's not that different. The whole thing is that we are self-medicating. We are, intoxicated by sensory pleasures, by sex and drugs. In the book, it's soma, which is, by the way, a Vedic concept. Huxley was highly impacted and transformed by studying the Bhagavad Gita and the Vedic wisdom. And he wrote this book, not coincidentally, as a result, and using even the term soma, which is a Vedic term for an intoxication. And so it's this world of, again, self-medication with sex, drugs, and sensory pleasures to numb myself from all of the hardships, all of the pains. And then I don't rebel. I just fall in line. And I never have to even know that I'm deprived from my own existence, or from the truth, or from the world that is actually real. So it's another dream world, because we're imprisoned. But in this prison, the bars are made of gold,
Mm-hmm.
and it all looks cushy and feels good. It's pleasurable. But is there any satisfaction for the real self? Zero. Just smiles and laughter and happiness that is skin deep. And that's the prison.
I got goosebumps when you mentioned signing up, and I was thinking, have I signed up for that as well? And have we all signed up for that in some ways? And, I think some of us are less signed up than others, but what a good question to just contemplate for ourselves is, in what ways have I signed up for that kind of life of Maya, of delusion?
Yeah, I mean, count me in. I've also signed up for it, and I'm seeing, I'm constantly dealing with the consequences, the ramifications of having invested my entire being into this illusory idea of reality. And so I'm trapped in Musk's simulation, just as we all are. For me, it's in some ways no different. The only difference is that I have a deep, deep, deep conviction that this is not the reality. And I'm so clear based on what I've experienced personally and what I've seen of others who have gotten out, who've unplugged from the matrix. There is so much more. It is so powerful to even tap into a glimpse of what's beyond this temporary, phenomenal existence.
Well, beautiful. And thank you for inspiring me and everyone in the Upbuild community, as always, with your wisdom and your insights. It was a beautiful reflection, and I'm so thrilled that we got to have this conversation today.
It means so much to me, Michael. Thank you. It's a gift for me to speak with you about this and to share something.